some people would argue we are an organization, so others say we're a network or we're a federation, or I don't know, whatever the definition we want to use, it's fine with me. I think the important thing and the thing that really makes us unique and different is the national chapter network. I mean, that's what really gives us a cutting edge. That's what makes us different. And I will explain you why I see it like that from my point of view, is because if you think about it, corruption is not very different. I mean, a dirty procurement process in South Korea is the same as a dirty procurement process in Chile. Paying a bribe to a policeman in my own country, Mexico, is exactly the same as paying a bribe to a policeman in Kenya, and so on. It's not so different. And to be honest, the way of solving the issues is as well not so different. I mean, it's about bringing oversight from a third party whenever the government and the private sector are doing business. It's about providing autonomy to those institutions that are meant to be watchdog of those that are handling public money in government. It's about providing access to information, whoever wants to access public information, and so on. The solutions from a policy, from an academic point of view, are quite similar. What is the big difference? Is that corruption is deeply rooted into the real politics of a country. It's deeply rooted into the culture, into the history, into the dynamics of a country. And that's what makes Transparency International unique, that you or we, Transparency International, are a collection of local experts that understand corruption and how to go about it in each of 110 or 15 countries all around the world. That's the difference, because I can pride myself of being an anti-corruption expert, and I have been in this business for 20 years, and yeah, and you see my CV, and oh wow, Alejandro knows a lot. But if I go to any country and I tell them how to solve the corruption problem, chances are that people will laugh at me, because I will be telling them from my book how to go about it in the academic sense. But the reality is that I don't know the political dynamics. I don't know who are the politicians that really want to change. I don't know who are the real owners of the media empires that nobody sees. I don't know all of these things that only local people understand because you live there and you have the day-to-day. So that's the richness, and that's the beauty of our global network. And that's why for me it's so important to really build and cultivate these relationships with the national chapters, because that's the way we're gonna really advance our agenda. No? So I think that's, I mean, probably the key message I want to give you. Don't forget that you, as a national chapter, as an accredited national chapter, you are the ones that create Transparency International. We are the secretariat. We have an important function, and my colleagues, Roberto and Daniela and others, will be talking about it. We, of course, do a lot of work at the global level. We produce a lot of knowledge. We provide resources. We do many things that they will be describing. But at the end of the day, you are the associates. You are the owners of the network, and we work with you and for you. No, and that's why it's so important in the case, for example, of my colleagues, Katie and Mariam in this case, that we know what you are doing, what are your challenges, what are the new things you want to do, so we can really be that bridge. That's the function of the global movement. No? Of my team is to be that bridge between the local, between the national chapters, between you and your needs, and what is being discussed, designed, produced, and the things we can do at the more global or regional level. No? That's our bridge function. I like to call ourselves sometimes ambassadors. I mean, we work for you and we represent you outside. But whatever definition we give it, that's our role. We need to be able to work very close to you. And that's why a meeting like this one, where we are seeing each of us face to face, where we will be sharing what we do at the central level, etc., is a very good opportunity, and the ongoing dialogue we have in a day-to-day basis. No. Just to finish and give word to Mariam, she's going to talk briefly about the work we do in the Pacific. Remind you, we have 115, I think, national chapters around the globe, all of them are very different. You have the very large, very well-resourced chapters. I think Bangladesh keeps on probably being the leader in terms of numbers, with close to 300 employees and a multi-million annual budget, etc. And then we have others that are smaller, but not less efficient or not less impactful, of course, at a different scale, but that probably many of the ones that are based in Western Europe, for example, which are a very small office, probably one employee, and then they have a very influential and active network of volunteers and people that donate time and effort to help, which might not be so different from your own experience. And we have anything in between, right? So the chapters are highly autonomous, they organize themselves in the way they prefer, and they have their own agendas. No, so I think I will leave it at that. We will have time for Q&A a bit later, but I will want to hear also from Mariam to share a little bit closer to you what she's doing in the Pacific. So thank you very much. Thanks for the time. Glad to be with you.
That's great. Mariam, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's often hard to follow from Alejandro's high energy, but I will try. Just in the Pacific, in terms of coverage, we have chapters, and it's great to see our Fijian colleagues in this call. We have chapters in PNG, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, and a national contact now in Fiji, which is Integrity Fiji. And then, as you mentioned, Julie, myself and Katie working at the regional level, supporting the Pacific chapters, but also yourselves, the New Zealand and Australian chapters as well in the broader region. And the chapters, at least at the national level, have been working on corruption issues for quite a while, for quite a few years. But the sort of add-on, or the thing we're doing, or we're trying to do new this year, is to try and engage at the regional level, entering or trying to bring the anti-corruption agenda into the regional policy spaces. And then in addition to that, we're also hoping to have partners in other countries, in Polynesia and Micronesia. So we've already started coordinating with the Pacific chapters, New Zealand, Australia, on key common issues, like money laundering is something that New Zealand is really invested in. And we're hoping, or we're starting actually to introduce it to the regional policy space, which is great. So that's a bit of a snapshot from the Pacific. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you. That's excellent. Now I'd like to we're going to hear now about the global strategy, which has taken a long time to develop, but that's been really good because of the amount of engagement from across the globe, across all the Transparency chapters, and Transparency International New Zealand was part of that. So I'd like to now invite Daniela Werner, from who's the Strategy and Mel Manager. Daniela, do you want to share your screen and get, thank you.
So I guess you can hear me now. Can you see my screen? So it's working.
Yes.
And it's the presentation mode, right?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, okay.
Yes, you're good to go.
Thank you. So I will take a couple of minutes to just walk you through some highlights from our new strategy 2030, holding power to account. I guess it's familiar to you. But let's just see also what this means with regards to movement-wide implementation, and also what it means with regards to the national chapter strategic planning. So our new TI strategy, holding power to account, it's a living strategy with a very clear and positive aim, with built-in agility across three strategic cycles to respond to the different contexts we have in the movement. There is a very clear ambition. It's about what we collectively can do, how we can maximize the strength of our network. It's really about connecting. We want to make sure that we can coordinate much better our global impact and our work at the global level with the relevant actions and advocacy that are important at the national context, and vice versa. The other thing that is really unique about this strategy is it's not only about the what we want to achieve, but really about how we want to get there. How do we want to work differently? A very quick reminder about the process of developing the strategy, because what is very important to note that it is based on our Vision 2030 research paper and another research paper called Ahead of the Curve. At the same time, it is based on a very wide consultation process across the movement. We had more than 200 survey responses, including 71 official chapter responses, 127 participants from 95 countries in a lot of virtual meetups, and many pages of feedback that were received. There is a strategy, there was a movement strategy task force in place that came together regularly to basically discuss and plan the next steps under the board leadership and under TIS participation and support. So our strategy is the movement response to the challenges and opportunities that we identified for the next 10 years. You can read this. What the images that I'm posting here, you can also see them in the strategy paper. I perhaps just want us to look at the opportunities here. There is a much greater awareness of corruption and its impacts. There is, we can see growth in anti-corruption laws and reforms, increased political participation, technological advances, and greater demand for social justice. So obviously it's important that we are aware of the challenges we are facing, but we also need to know that there are a lot of opportunities that, that can support our work. As I mentioned earlier, our current strategy is split up into 3 cycles. You might remember our last strategy was a 5-year strategy. We had a midterm review in the middle, but the strategy in itself wasn't changed at all for 5 years. So this is different now. We have a 10-year strategy. It's a very long period, but it is split up into the first strategic cycle of 2 years and then 2 subsequent 4-year cycles. And this is meant to allow for a lot of agility and learning. At the end of each strategic cycle, we will stop and try to understand the progress we made, what went well, what didn't go so well, and also do we need to adjust our strategy for the next strategic cycle. I also don't want to dwell on this for too long, but just to mention that our strategy formulates 3 very positive aims that we all want to work toward, and this is underlying all of the objectives that are formulated there. The first is advance institutional checks and balances. We also want to accelerate the enforcement of anti-corruption standards, and we want to activate the social oversight to protect the common good. So, and here it is. What do we want to achieve very concretely? And our strategy has formulated 7 objectives. And each of these objectives has then 2 or 3 very specific outcomes. And yeah, I think this is really like one of the most important pages. What do we want to do? What do we want to achieve? So firstly, we have protecting the public resources, stopping flows of dirty money, the third one is securing integrity in politics, driving integrity in business, pursuing enforcement and justice, expanding civic space for accountability, and finally, we want to contribute to community leadership against corruption. So these objectives, I mean, they are numbered here, but they don't have an order of priority. They all require action throughout the decade of 10 years, obviously, with differing levels of priority for different contexts. So for your country, you might not be working on all 7 at all times, but you can pick those that are most relevant for your context. But all of these objectives are defining our contribution to the world that we actually want to see in 2030. What is also important to note about these objectives is that they interrelate. So each of them contributes to the goals, and they are served by others. So for example, the work with civil society and the work with businesses helps us achieve similar goals, or in some cases the same goals. It can help us serve strategic objective 1, protecting the public resources. So at times it might appear as if there are overlaps, but this is in fact, it's just a reality of the work we do. These objectives, they support each other. As I mentioned earlier, our strategy is not only about the how. No, it's not only about the what, but it's also about how are we going to achieve all of these things. And therefore, it formalized 6 commitments that, that we want to work toward, and where we also formulated very clear goals in what we want to achieve. The first one, I've already mentioned that, it's we want to build agility into our working. The second one is connected global and national strategies. It's because one of the main learnings from our last strategy, 2020, was that there is no such thing as a self-implementing strategy. It's not enough to have it there and to launch it and to have it on the website and evaluate it every 2 or 3 years. We actually need to put some effort in there to make sure it's translated to the national level, regional level, and obviously also the global. Effective coordination, advocacy, and support, I think that probably speaks for itself. We want to work much more closely together, coordinate our actions, again, at the different levels. Stronger partnerships and presence, it's about like strategic presence in very strategic countries. For example, we want to look at building up a presence in India, also in China, but it's not only about very specific countries, it's also about finding new forms of presence. So for example, we have some countries with a very authoritarian environment, and it's very difficult for our national chapters to be active there. So we want to have come up with like new forms of presence where we can be active in this kind of context. Then the strategy formulates core principles and methods. They are also named here. We want to be inclusive and intersectional, climate and environment conscious, evidence-based, tech-savvy, protective of our people, and ethical and accountable. I really encourage you, if you haven't done so already, you probably did, but to go back to these commitments and look at them, because there is a lot in them, and there is a lot we can do about it. And finally, impact and learning is our last commitment, where we commit to monitoring at a movement level the progress we make, and our achievements and our learnings, and also sharing that with a wider community. So I'm already moving on to the strategy operationalization. You probably might have heard that there is a movement priority setting process going on at the moment. We have shared a survey with all of the chapters in the movement to understand who is doing what. What are your priorities? What are the priorities you will be working on in this strategic cycle? But also, to what extent are those priorities aligned with our strategy? We will get an overview of that after the survey. As part of the survey, we are also asking questions about baseline assessment, the status quo. So, for example, if you say you're going to work in the area of illicit financial flows, we're not only asking about what are your plans, what are you going to do in the next couple of years, but also what is the current situation, because this will allow us to measure progress later on. We have put some processes and tools in place to make sure that we are all remain focused on the strategy a huge momentum at the moment because the strategy is quite new, but we just need to make sure that we keep on talking about it. So here at the Secretariat, in my team, we are developing a strategy monitoring, evaluation, and learning framework. It will allow us to monitor progress and understanding our impact and learnings, but I also see very much as a catalyst for implementation of the strategy, because it will make sure that we will have annual reports and that we will have annual discussions about where we stand. There, we are also working at the moment on a strategy hub. It's a one-stop platform for knowledge management about the specific issues that I've just introduced to you, the strategic objectives and the making it happen commitments. There is a strategy reference group in place. It consists of members of 15 TI chapters, and this group meets regularly to discuss topics that are relevant to the strategy implementation. This group also helps us to pilot some approaches, to give us feedback and to decide on the way forward. Also very important, what we put a lot of emphasis on is increased and better communication and engagement, and that we will aim at facilitating strategic discussions and exchanges about collaborations across the movement. So what does that mean for you and your chapter? So at first, you can identify your contribution to the movement strategy and articulate exactly how you're going to, how your impact and how your work is aligned with the strategy. There is no regulation or rule or template on how this should be done, because I think it's very important that that we recognize that the chapters still do have their own priorities and their own cycles, their own donor agreements, reporting processes, and so on. However, we need to understand at a certain point how our work is aligned and how we contribute together to the strategy. The second thing is to also, from your chapter perspective, monitor and report on progress against the strategy implementation. This is something we will facilitate from our team. We will reach out to you at least annually about progress. And then obviously, and this is what you've always done, but the chapters are very much encouraged to engage, coordinate, step up, collaborate around the strategic objectives. The last point is about reviews. As I mentioned earlier, we have 3 strategic cycles. We are planning to run some evaluations and impact reviews. And when this is the case, we will communicate it just in advance. And it would be really great if everybody participated and giving us information about what works, what needs to change, what do we need to adjust perhaps in the next strategic cycle. So this is already my last slide. We want to show impact to strengthen our own accountability. I think it's also very much about walking the talk. I mean, we're constantly pushing governments and other power holders to be transparent, but we need to do the same. We need to be accountable. We want to strengthen our internal learning, decision-making, effectiveness, and ultimately, obviously, we want to become better and better at our work. We want to be effective at what we do. I'll leave it here. I'm very open to answer questions later on. Should I hand back to Julie?
Yeah, thanks so much. If you could just stop sharing your screen now, Daniela.
Yes,
that'd be
I'll
great.
do.
That's great. I'll talk a little bit about what TINZ has done after Roberto's had done his presentation, but about what TINZ has done to align. We're still currently in a draft strategy phase, but aligning. It's a really close fit. There's synchronicity between the TI global strategy and what we had before, and then moving it through to what we will be having in the future. So great to see some comment in the chat, and please put your questions and comments in there, and we'll deal with all the questions at the end, I think. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to invite Roberto Kukutschka to talk about some of the measurement tools that TI as a global movement uses in the fight against corruption. So Roberto, over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear and see me?
Yes, we can hear and see you.
Perfect. And my screen as well? There should be a PowerPoint presentation. If I'm showing something embarrassing, just let me know.
No, there is a PowerPoint presentation. You're now in presentation mode. Thanks, Roberto.
Perfect.
Ready to go. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you very much. So hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here this morning in Berlin and I guess evening over there. Like I said, I'm Roberto Kukutschka. I'm also from Mexico, and Alejandro basically took over my origin story as well, so I don't need to introduce that much about myself. So I'm here to talk about the global measurement tools, which are basically the Secretariat's way to measure corruption at the global level. And we have mostly two approaches, or perhaps the most well-known tools that we have at TI are the Corruption Perceptions Index and the Global Corruption Barometer. The first one, the Corruption Perceptions Index, is an expert opinion aggregated measure. And the second one is where we talk to citizens to get their experiences, but also their attitudes, opinions, and yeah, so it's about experiences and attitudes, right? And I would start with the Corruption Perceptions Index just to clarify a few things that are common misconceptions. The Corruption Perceptions Index is a composite indicator. So it is not a survey like the Global Corruption Barometer. There are some surveys from experts and business people that go in there, but it's not only based on surveys. There are also expert assessments that go into this. Second point is the Corruption Perceptions Index only takes into account expert opinions and business people opinions. So no citizens or anything are involved in the scores or ratings that go into the Corruption Perceptions Index. And finally, and this is also one of the points of criticism to the index, is that it only measures or captures the levels of corruption in the public sector. So nothing about the behavior of the private sector or certain types of corruption, such as illicit financial flows or stuff like that, would come in here. Just as a general overview, the Corruption Perceptions Index is one of the tools with the broadest geographical coverage. So it covers 180 countries in its last edition from 2020. As you may know, it uses a scale from 0, which means clean, to 0, which means corrupt, to 100, that means very clean. We usually have New Zealand and Denmark at the very top. And in the latest edition, we had around 2/3 of the countries scoring below 50, and the average score for all regions is around 43. Now, I don't want to go too deep into results because we will have to talk about this when the next edition of the CPI comes up, and we will have plenty of time to do that. What we have been trying to do over the past few years is we acknowledge that it is not always easy to sell the CPI results, because there are some fluctuations that might be hard to explain, especially for people on the ground, so to speak. So what we have been trying to do is to highlight the strengths of the index, which is its comparative nature across countries. So over the past few years, what we have been trying to do is to come up with themes, as we call them, in which we triangulate the results that we get from the CPI with different current events, so to speak. In 2017, we talked about the relationship between corruption and media freedom. In 2018, we talked about the corruption and democracy. In 2019, it was about corruption and integrity. And in 2020, of course, it was the COVID pandemic. So what we have been trying to do is to give chapters another, so to speak, way to engage with the results by looking at how corruption interacts with different themes that might be relevant for them. So like I said, we also produce some, in collaboration with our advocacy team at the Secretariat and with the comms team, some key messages and policy recommendations on what we're seeing from the CPI. And of course, then you as a chapter can decide to take this messaging on board or go your own way or just completely ignore the results of the CPI, whatever suits you best. I think this is too specific, but also I think it is important to talk about the quality control processes that we undergo for the Corruption Perceptions Index. So in the past, there were some, I would say, mishaps. Maybe Julie will remember. So since then, we have upped our game. And now the Corruption Perceptions Index is produced through blind calculations. So we have 2 internal researchers, so myself and another colleague from the research team, and 2 external ones from universities around the world, helping us with the calculation of the index. And until the 4 calculations are exactly the same, we do not move forward with the results. The second step is these results get then passed on to the regional advisors at the Secretariat for them to look into them, check whether everything makes sense, or if they see anything that might be fishy that we might need to address with the sources, or that we might need to take a second look at. And once that stage is cleared, we also share the results with you, with the chapters, for you to, ask questions. Let us know if you think there might be a few issues with your score, and try and find a way to explain what's going on, either from a methodological, technical point of view, or also with based on like the current happenings. Although, of course, you are usually more aware of what's going on in the country, but sometimes even just looking at the types of corruption or the sources that the Corruption Perceptions Index incorporates is enough to give us a bit of an idea of why the score is changing. And also, as part of the quality control process, we submitted the index to an external audit by the European Commission's Joint Research Center a few years ago. So this was an audit not of the results themselves, although they also recalculated the index just to prove that it can be produced by other people, not just us, if they have access to the right data. And yeah, they came up with just a few recommendations, but in general, the methodology and the concept of the CPI was validated. And I mean, I'm happy to answer any questions about the Corruption Perceptions Index. The second tool that we have, which I find way more exciting and much more flexible than the Corruption Perceptions Index, and here is also a part where I think involvement of chapters is also much more crucial and critical, is the Global Corruption Barometer. So the Global Corruption Barometer is, like I said, our public opinion survey, right? We're one of the very few organizations or NGOs actually that have the capacity to carry over such intensive data collection exercises. So in this round of the GCB, which is the 10th one, we've been doing this since 2003. We have covered Africa, which was the first one we did in this round. Then we moved on to MENA, Asia, EU, and we will close this round with the Pacific. I think in response to chapters feedback, and also due to funding, of course, we have moved from the idea of a global survey. So this like Global Corruption Barometer used to be a global survey where we would ask the same set of questions across all countries in the world. So we have moved away from that approach to take a more regional approach where we can also incorporate questions that are more relevant for the context in which you are. So, for example, in the case of the Middle East and North Africa, we looked further into one of the issues that the chapters in the region were most concerned about, which was the use of personal connections. For the case of the EU, we added, in the case of Asia, we added a little bit about the anti-corruption agencies, their performance and so on, because as you may know, in Asia, a lot of the anti-corruption efforts have been driven by these agencies. In the case of the EU, we looked deeper into the issue of the relationship between business and government, this area of lobbying, dirty money, tax evasion, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And well, for the Pacific, we did incorporate a few new questions here. I think some of the ones we added were on natural resource exploitation, and also the phenomena called wantok. So we look forward. I mean, we already have the data set for this one, still have to conduct some final quality control, but we look forward to analyze the results, and we will be publishing this as soon as we possibly can. And yeah, just to close with the Global Corruption Barometer, it is one of the largest corruption-related surveys in this round. I mean, like I said, it's been produced since 2002, 2003. This edition of the Global Corruption Barometer will contain a total of around 105 or 110 countries. And we have talked so far to over 150,000 people across the world. So yeah, that's it on the GCB as well. If you have any questions, I will be happy to answer them. And I will stop now so that Julie doesn't scold me for running late.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of our speakers today. And I'd just like to say on the Pacific Corruption Barometer, unfortunately, New Zealand's not included in that. It was because it was aid funded, it covered countries which were aid receivers. So that was why that's why New Zealand didn't get included. We did try. We tried to sort of look around for some dollars. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. So it'd be a great thing to have when we can have it. We have had one corruption barometer done in New Zealand, and interestingly, when I was reading it, it said that 3% of those who answered the survey said they'd paid a bribe. So it was an interesting reflection, and it sort of gave me pause. So now what I'm going to do is pick up a question that Joseph Varamu asked about other best practices. And what I'll do, I think, Joseph, is I'm going to ask you to unmute so that you can ask that question yourself. And so, because I think we've got enough time to do this. So I think I've been able to ask you, can you check, Joseph, if you can unmute yourself? If you can't, then I'll read the question. Yeah, I'll try it again. Joseph, are you there? Can you unmute? Perhaps not. All right. So what I'll ask, the question that Joseph said was that one huge learning curve for us, that's in Fiji, is that the strategy affirms us to be courageous in speaking out in nations like Fiji that have a liberal democracy. Are there other best practices from other chapters in authoritarian nations that we can learn from as we advocate on anti-corruption and government procurements, etc.? Roberto, can you? No, strategy. Daniela, can you answer this one?
I was ready to take the hot seat, but okay. I
was actually thinking that maybe Alejandro might be better placed to answer that, because he's also the one working on strategic presence commitment in the TI Secretariat. I don't have a best practice example right now in mind, but what the strategy does is definitely leave the scope for many, many different contexts. So, and also recognition that we cannot do and achieve and be active in the very same way, because we are working under very different governments and circumstances. So do not feel pushed to do anything that you are not comfortable with. It all depends on your own analysis and own context. There are good practice examples. If you're interested, I would also even recommend to get in touch later, and probably we could have another meeting to discuss them, but perhaps Alejandro can come in.
Yeah, of course. I mean, in this case, unfortunately, there are many experiences from all around the world. I mean, you can imagine Russia, Venezuela, Vietnam, Cambodia, you name it. Civil society is very limited, and well, as I say, I mean, there's no specific recipe on how to go about it, but at the end of the day, the trick is in knowing how to play a good balance, right? I mean, as you know, Transparency International is an organization that prides itself in being a critique, but also coming forward with solutions and arguments and ideas on how to improve things. So in this context of authoritarian regimes, one has to be very skillful in playing that card. One has to avoid the labels of being opposition or being against everything, while at the same time, one cannot seem to be very friendly with a non-democratic government. No? So it's basically the game of balances. And of course, there are many experiences. Right now in Vietnam, they are experiencing a very heavy backlash, for example, from a new elected regime. And what they are doing, for example, there is that they are quickly readapting the narrative around all their programs and activities. Well, with the former regime, a few weeks ago, they were a little bit more vocal. They were part of the Open Government Partnership, and they were doing things that seemed to be a little bit more frontal in criticism to the government. With this new one, who has been crushing on civil society, they are very quickly adapting their programs to seem to be more like educational, producing material. So they are kind of watering down the type of policy work they do, the advocacy work they do, into something that seems to be easier to be received by an aggressive government. No, that's just an example, but I mean, in other cases, I remember the chapter in Venezuela when things got very bad. They moved their agenda from working mainly with the national government. They quickly started decentralizing and working at a more provincial level. That worked well for them because Venezuela is a federal country, so they could work with the opposition governors in some states. They could work with those that were part of the official party, and they took the pressure off from targeting the national government and working more balanced and in a more discreet way with the provinces for a while. No? So there are many strategies of this type, but I think what I want to transmit to you, Joseph, and all of you, is that it's a balancing game. One needs to know when to up the hand and when to get more vocal and aggressive, and when to play it softer, and always play that card. No? And of course, Joseph and anybody that is interested, we can organize brief conversations with some of the chapters. As I said, it could be we could have a chat with Russia, we could have a chat with Cambodia, or with the experts that know the details about their strategies. But yeah, I think I'll leave it there. Hope this helps.
Thanks, that's great. Now, if anybody wants to ask a question, I think I'd be really happy to accept it. If you want to raise your hand, that would be useful. You just use the reactions screen down below, and I've now allowed everybody to unmute and to raise their hand and so on. So if anybody's got a comment. Kay Jones, I see you talking about New Zealand companies critical of the rules favouring large multinational corporations. Is that, I presume that's the procurement rules over smaller New Zealand ones. Yeah, I presume it is. So if anybody would like to, Kay, would you like to comment on anything that you've heard today?
Oh, well, only in that thing of the reporting function and the monitoring of what is officially there is only part of the picture, and sometimes having the ability to monitor the data requires a lot of training by agencies as well. And that when I gave the example of multinationals being favoured by rules, that's sort of on the edges, where if you're excluding the smaller companies from tendering for contracts, it also means that there isn't an opportunity for the people working within the country to build their own capacity. So it's that thing of somebody coming in from overseas actually having a much bigger role playing. I'm thinking particularly in the tech sector, but I'm sure there are other areas where it plays out too. But I'm aware that there's others on the call who've probably got far better knowledge of how challenging it can be to actually find out where the favoritism might be shown, because like how easy is it to get annual reports to actually check how much is government spending at a quantum. Like New Zealand spends $6 billion a year on services. and how much of a proportion of that is going to particular large players and how much to other players? So where is the capacity for corruption to be falling into that pattern of spending?
It's a great question, Kay, and I think it fits into that strategic objective of protecting the public's resources. And I know that's where one of the pieces of work that TINZ is trying to do is around procurement, and we've certainly think that there's a lot more capacity for having more transparency around New Zealand procurement, government procurement, and local government procurement as well, I think. So that's certainly a really important area. Who am I going to pick on next? Oh, yes. So has anybody else got a question that they'd like to ask? You can just raise your hand under reactions, or unmute and say something. Daniela, maybe I'll ask you a question about the strategy and say, like, where, in terms of countries starting to adapt the strategy and use it, what can you talk about what you're seeing from the strategy around the country, around the world, the globe?
Well, there are really various different approaches in the movement. There are some chapters who I think haven't had the scope yet really to look at the new strategy, and there are others who have like adopted copies of the movement strategy, and it's also in these cases very much organized according to the 2030 strategy, and they have formulated their goals and ambitions very clearly in line with what we have in holding power to account. We are currently not pushing for either this or that. What is interesting to note perhaps also is that there are some regional approaches. For example, the Latin American chapters, they have all come together because they recognized that there is value in having like a regional strategy, and then obviously also understand how the national feeds into it. But they saw this as important for fundraising purposes and communicating with their partners and stakeholders. So they have engaged a consultant to work together with all of the Latin American chapters to come up with these results. I think in the Asia Pacific, there also have been meetings organized by the TIS team. I guess some of you probably participated in that. In other regions, it's not so advanced yet, so it's more like a chapter to chapter approach. We do have some examples, and my colleague Katrin is planning to share them also. I don't know if you have been in touch with her already about that, but if you're interested in seeing some examples, I mean, we can provide them. And the plan is obviously to put them on the strategy hub or link them on that strategy hub once it's launched properly, that everybody can take a look.
Great, thank you very much. Just like to ask ask Keitha Booth to speak. Keitha is the independent reporting mechanism, as well as being a great long-standing member. She's the independent reporting mechanism for the Open Government Partnership in New Zealand. So Keitha, do you want to ask your question?
Thanks, Julie. Yes, I'm interested in whether the global strategy or any particular chapter has a priority of it for looking at the corruption of land ownership, particularly in developing countries.
It is, as far as I know, land ownership is not mentioned in the strategy, but that doesn't mean it's not there.
It certainly is.
We definitely do have in the TI Secretariat, I know that some colleagues are working together at a project proposal, in particular looking at land ownership and conflicts and corruption in the African context. So this has been going on for years already. We did have, I think since 2017, we did have projects in that regard. Maybe that also plays a role in the mining project that was coordinated by TI Australia, perhaps to a lesser extent, but I could imagine that land ownership does play quite a strong role there. So yes, it's definitely here and there, and it will probably fall under protecting the public resources.
Yeah, and I might add to Daniela's answer. that, yeah, indeed, she's completely right. I mean, Africa, in terms of TI, is the region that has developed this more with their project, and we have a person in the Secretariat working on that. So my guess would be that if the African chapters were to do this regional exercise, or this exercise of bringing the global strategy, giving it a more regional angle, I could almost guess that land would be one of the areas that they would focus on. But anyway, if there's an interest to get to know a little bit more of what they have been doing, I would be very, very glad also to make the connection with the relevant people in the Secretariat in Berlin that are working on that topic, if there's an interest. Happy
Thank
to do
you.
that.
I just see note in the notes that there is some work being done in PNG on report of discrimination and land ownership that's available, and you can have a look at the chat function there and have a look at it.
Thank you.
Very good. Has anybody else got a question they'd like to ask? Keitha, can you just put your hand down if you've not? Thanks. One of the other things that I just wondered, maybe Alejandro, actually maybe Alejandro could talk about is the advocacy and legal advice centres that also are run by some of the chapters, because we don't have it in New Zealand, but there are some chapters that have them.
Yeah, that's a pleasure to talk about those legal advice centers, because I think they're a very powerful tool. I'll try to be very brief because I could talk a lot about them, but basically, we call them ALACs, Advocacy and Legal Advice Center. They were some years ago the first time that the national chapters kind of opened a proper door, a proper window, a proper hotline with the general public to receive allegations of corruption, or to receive whistleblowers that were bringing cases of corruption. So basically, it's a system where we receive from the public an allegation of corruption. There's a team, usually of legal experts, that analyzes, decides, well, this is corruption or this is not corruption. In the case it's corruption, it gets further analyzed, documents, etc. It's reviewed. And then the different national chapters have different approaches. There are some chapters that will selectively take some cases and go even all the way as to do a legal argument and take part as part of a legal process to solve the issue. In other cases, this of course is limited because it cannot be in many cases, but they take some that are like a part of particular interest, and they will go all the way into court, etc. And in other cases, the chapters will just provide advice to the complainant and tell him or her which is the right channel to go to. They will put him or her in contact with volunteer lawyers that can help them, etc. In other cases, the chapter, because of the access we have, will reach out to the relevant government agencies, trying to broker the negotiations between the public institutions and the victim of corruption, and so on. No? So basically, it's a very powerful mechanism to solve individual problems, but it's also a valuable research tool, because once you have a working ALAC and you start aggregating information at a relatively important number of cases, then you can also start drawing policy recommendations and system suggestions on how to improve systems out of those cases. No? So it has this double purpose of alleviating immediate needs of people, of ordinary citizens that have problems, and at the same time providing direction for policy recommendations and for improving. No? And that has proven to be a very, very powerful way of working, because you can also build a lot of personal stories out of it. I mean, there are so many stories of people suffering through the health system, abuses at the education system level, sextortion. I mean, there are so many type of sad stories you can take out of those ALAC stories to help move forward our work. No? So that's, in a nutshell, the ALAC system.
That's great. And how many countries are the ALACs working in? Do you know?
My guess is that with some strength and limitations, etc., I think around 50, no, Daniela? Is that fair
Yeah,
number?
I would have said 65. Yeah.
Yes, great. Okay, I think we're coming to the end, and we said an hour, and that's what we're going to do. I'd really like to thank all of our speakers, Roberto and Alejandro and Daniela and who am I missing out there? Roberto, Alejandro, Daniela, and also Mariam and Katie for helping out there as well. It's great to see you all. It's great to see you all attending, and it's great that you've all that we've had the opportunity. We've got a wonderful global movement, a fantastic global movement. And it's great to connect across that movement. Often when you're volunteers or members, you may not get to see more than your own national chapter. So this is a real opportunity, because it's only when I've had the privilege of attending on behalf of the chapter to global meetings that I can actually see the strength and why it's so important that we are a global movement for change. And it's an amazing thing. It's a huge strength for New Zealand, and we give strength to the movement as well. So I think this is what's really, really important. Every single member gives us mandate. We give mandate to the global movement gives it back again. It's like a constant gift moving round and around, and together we're making it a better place. All right, so all good. So thank you very much for attending, and happy for you to send us questions. Oh, yes, people are clapping. Thank you, Jeff Galt. And so thanks very much, and really appreciate it. And it's been such a success. I think we'll try and have something again in the future like this. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Julie and Katie, for organizing, and good evening to everyone. Bye-bye.
You can open up your
everyone.
screens. People can open up their screens and videos and say hi and bye if you want to. Great.
What's the time over there now?
It is now, it's only 8 p.m, so it's still time.
All right.
Here's Keitha. Hi, Keitha.
Still have some
Hi
hours
there.
left of the evening.
Hi and bye.
Hi and bye, Keitha. She's great.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, there's Brendan. Brendan's one of our directors. Hi, Brendan. Gillian's also a director. Peter's a director, board member. Sorry, board member. Karen's a great member. All right. Okay. Thanks, folks. We're going to.
That was great.
Going to finish it up. Thanks very much.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you, Julie.
Bye. Same to you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.